I am Gabrielle Smith, though everyone calls me Gabby. At 29 years old, I never expected to be at the center of my family's biggest revelation. Coming from a restaurant dynasty, thanks to my grandmother's immigrant success story, I always felt like the family disappointment. My sister Victoria was the golden child while I was just the culinary school dropout. When Nonna Rosa passed away, I expected the will reading to be uncomfortable, but I never imagined what would happen next. If you are watching this, let me know where you are from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how my life changed forever that day. Growing up in Westchester County, one of New York's most affluent areas, should have been a dream. Our family home was a stunning Tudor-style mansion with a gourmet kitchen that could rival any restaurant, perfectly landscaped gardens, and a view of the Hudson River. From the outside, the Smiths appeared to have it all. My father, Robert Smith, was the CEO of Smith Family Restaurants, a chain of upscale Italian eateries that stretched from Maine to Virginia. My mother, Margaret Smith, served as the operations director, ensuring that every location maintained the family's standards of excellence. They were the perfect restaurant power couple, always impeccably dressed, always networking at industry events, always discussing expansion plans and profit margins. But the true source of our family's success came from my grandmother, Rosa Benedetto Smith. Nonna Rosa was an Italian immigrant who arrived in New York in 1952 with nothing but a suitcase full of handwritten recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. Starting with a tiny storefront in Little Italy, she built Smith's Italian kitchen from scratch, serving authentic dishes that reminded homesick immigrants of their mother's cooking. By the time I was born, what began as one small restaurant had grown into a multi-million-dollar empire, employing over 500 people across 15 locations. From an early age, I knew I was different from the rest of my family. While they discussed quarterly reports and franchise opportunities over dinner, I would be sketching menu ideas on my napkins or experimenting with flavor combinations in my head. My sister Victoria, 3 years my senior, was the perfect Smith heir. She had our father's business acumen and our mother's operational efficiency. By the time she was 14, she could analyze profit margins and suggest cost-cutting measures. I, on the other hand, could tell you everything about the history of Italian regional cuisines or explain why San Marzano tomatoes were worth the extra cost, topics that made my parents exchange worried glances. Victoria followed the perfect trajectory my parents laid out for her. She attended the prestigious Culinary Institute of America, not to cook, but to get their business management degree. Then she went to Wharton for her MBA, specializing in hospitality management. She joined Smith Family Restaurants at 25 and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming director of expansion by 28. She married Marcus Thompson, a successful restaurant consultant, in a lavish wedding featured in Food and Wine magazine. Everything about her life was calculated and executed with business precision. Meanwhile, I struggled to find my place in a family that valued profit margins above all else. I did well in school, but my interests never aligned with my parents' expectations. When I announced I wanted to attend culinary school to become a chef, my father actually laughed, thinking I was joking. When he realized I was serious, the disappointment on his face was crushing. "Cooking is what we pay people to do, Gabrielle," he said. "You need to focus on the business side. The world doesn't need another line cook." Despite their disapproval, I enrolled at the Institute of Culinary Education in New York, partially funded by a scholarship I had worked hard to obtain. My parents refused to pay my full tuition as a way to teach me responsibility, even though they had fully funded Victoria's much more expensive Wharton education. Nonna Rosa was the only one who supported my decision. Without telling my parents, she helped me with living expenses and occasionally sent me money for high-quality ingredients. "Follow your heart, cara mia," she would tell me during our weekly phone calls, always speaking in her mix of English and Italian. "Food is about amore, not just business. Money means nothing if you don't feed the soul." After 2 years at culinary school, I made the decision that would brand me as the family failure. I dropped out. But it wasn't because I couldn't handle the coursework. It was because I realized that the modern culinary world was moving away from the authentic, traditional cooking that spoke to my heart. While my classmates were learning molecular gastronomy and fusion techniques, I wanted to preserve the old ways, the methods that had been passed down through generations of Italian grandmothers. While Victoria was climbing the corporate ladder at Smith Family Restaurants, I was working as a private chef for wealthy families in Manhattan, making barely enough to cover my rent and student loans. I also started a food blog called Nonna's Kitchen Wisdom, where I wrote about traditional Italian cooking techniques and shared stories about the cultural significance of food. My parents saw my career choices as further proof of my inability to make sensible decisions. Every family gathering became an opportunity for them to point out the contrast between Victoria's success and my struggle. Victoria just negotiated our biggest franchise deal, my mother would announce proudly at Thanksgiving dinner. 3 new locations, projected to bring in $15 million in revenue. Then she would turn to me with a tight smile. "And how is your little cooking blog going, Gabrielle? Still getting dozens of readers?" They never understood that for me, success wasn't measured in dollars. I loved creating food that told stories, that connected people to their heritage, that made them feel loved and nourished. But in the Smith family, if you weren't making substantial money, you were failing. The strain in our relationship grew worse when I decided to leave private cooking and focus entirely on my blog and freelance food writing. I had been developing a following of people who appreciated authentic Italian cooking, and several food magazines had published my articles about traditional techniques. When I earned my first $2,000 month from my writing, I felt more pride than I ever had in my life. It was the first substantial income one had earned completely through my own passion and expertise. My father was less impressed. $2,000? Victoria makes that in a day. When are you going to grow up and join the real world, Gabrielle? What hurt the most was that they never even read my work. Not once. Victoria visited my tiny apartment in Brooklyn once when she was in the city for a restaurant opening. She looked at my collection of vintage Italian cookbooks and my carefully organized spice collection with a puzzled expression, clearly not understanding what she was seeing, but trying to be supportive in her own way. "It's very authentic," she offered before quickly changing the subject to her recent promotion to Vice President of Operations. Nonna Rosa was different. Despite being in her 80s and having health issues, she read every single blog post I wrote. She would call me after each one, sometimes in tears, telling me how I had captured the essence of her own memories. "You understand, Gabrielle," she would say. "You understand that food is memory, is love, is who we are." She would share stories with me that she had never told anyone else, about her mother's kitchen in Tuscany, about the recipes that had been passed down through 5 generations of Benedetto women, about how heartbroken she was when the restaurant started using cheaper ingredients and shortcuts to increase profits. "What we serve now," she confided during one of our conversations, "it's not what I taught your father. It's not what built our reputation. But they say customers don't know the difference, that it costs too much to do things the old way." As I entered my late 20s, my financial situation remained challenging. The food writing world is incredibly competitive, and while I was building a reputation, I still struggled to make ends meet. I worked as a part-time catering assistant and taught private cooking lessons to supplement my income, all while trying to build my brand as a food writer and traditional cooking advocate. Meanwhile, my parents continued their tough love approach, refusing to help me financially, even when I was hospitalized with food poisoning from a catering job gone wrong and faced a $3,000 medical bill. "You made your choices," my mother said. "Now you have to live with the consequences." All the while, they continued to fund Victoria's lavish lifestyle, buying her and Marcus a vacation home in the Hamptons as a 3rd anniversary present and providing her with a company car, expense account, and stock options. The disparity in how they treated us couldn't have been more obvious, but whenever I brought it up, they dismissed my concerns. "When you start making responsible choices, we'll treat you like a responsible adult," was my father's standard response. By the time I turned 29, I had almost given up on ever gaining my parents' approval or understanding. I focused instead on my relationship with Nonna Rosa, who remained my biggest champion and the only family member who seemed to value me for who I was rather than what I could contribute to the bottom line. Nonna Rosa's health began declining about 8 months before her death. At 86, she had always been remarkably energetic and sharp-minded, but a stroke last spring had left her frail and sometimes confused. As her condition worsened, I found myself taking the train from Brooklyn to her house in Bronxville more frequently. Despite my tight budget, I couldn't bear the thought of not spending time with her while I still could. Her house was a place that had always felt more like home to me than my parents' mansion. It was modest by Smith family standards, but it was filled with warmth, family photos, Italian pottery, herbs growing in the kitchen windows, and the lingering sense of garlic and basil. Unlike the sterile perfection of my parents' home, Nonna's place felt lived in and loved. During my visits, we would sit in her kitchen, the heart of her home, drinking espresso and having the kinds of conversations that nourished my soul. "Tell me what you're writing about now," she would say, her eyes still bright with interest despite her failing body. I would share my latest articles and ideas with her, and she would ask thoughtful questions about traditional techniques and regional variations. Sometimes she would share stories I had never heard before, about her journey to America, about the struggle to keep her restaurant authentic while making it profitable, about her own mother's cookbook that had been lost during the war. These stories became the foundation for some of my most popular blog posts, though I never revealed their source. As her health deteriorated, our conversations sometimes took mysterious turns. About 4 months before she died, during one of our afternoon talks, she took my hand in her frail one and said something that puzzled me. "I have been saving something special for you, Cara MIA. All these years, I have been working on something that will change everything. Don't worry about money anymore. Nonna has a plan." When I asked her what she meant, she just smiled and changed the subject to a story about her mother's wedding cookies. Similar cryptic comments came up several times in her final months, but she never elaborated no matter how much I pressed her. The call came on a Wednesday morning in September. I was in my apartment kitchen testing a recipe for braised short ribs when my father's voice came through my phone, uncharacteristically subdued. "Nonna passed peacefully in her sleep last night," he said. "The nurse found her this morning." Despite expecting this news for months, it hit me like a physical blow. I sank into my kitchen chair, tears already streaming down my face. "The funeral will be on Saturday," he continued, "all business as usual. We expect you to be here Friday night for the family dinner beforehand." I managed to choke out that I would be there before hanging up. I spent the next hour crying, not just for the loss of my grandmother, but for the loss of the only person who truly understood my passion for authentic cooking and traditional food culture. The next few days passed in a blur. I maxed out my credit card to buy a last-minute train ticket and a suitable black dress for the funeral. When I arrived at my parents' house on Friday evening, the contrast between my life and theirs had never felt more stark. I wheeled my worn duffel bag up the circular driveway, acutely aware of my off-brand shoes and the fact that my black dress came from a discount store. Victoria and Marcus were already there, both looking immaculate in expensive morning attire. My sister gave me a perfunctory hug while my mother frowned at my appearance. "You could have made more of an effort, Gabrielle," she said by way of greeting. "This is an important family occasion. People will be watching." Dinner that night was tense. My father and Marcus discussed the impact of Nonna's death on the restaurant business while my mother and Victoria talked about the funeral arrangements they had made with minimal input from me, despite my close relationship with Nonna. Several times I noticed them exchanging meaningful glances when certain topics came up, particularly anything related to Nonna's estate or her house. After the meal, I overheard a snippet of conversation between my parents in the butler's pantry as I was helping clear dishes. "Jonathan Miller called again about the will situation," my father said in a low voice. "He insists on following Rosa's exact instructions." "Well, we knew this day would come," my mother replied. "Robert, you need to make sure things go smoothly. We can't have any surprises that might affect the business." They noticed me then and abruptly changed the subject to funeral flower arrangements. That night, as I tried to sleep in the guest room that had once been my childhood bedroom, I wondered what they had been discussing. I knew Nonna had money, but I had never given much thought to her will or inheritance. I assumed Victoria would get the lion's share given her involvement in the family business, and I was fine with that. I expected perhaps a small bequest, maybe some of her cooking equipment or family recipes that she knew I loved. The morning of the funeral dawned crisp and clear, perfect September weather that reminded me of all the times Nonna and I had walked through Central Park together, talking about food and life. The service was well attended, a testament to how beloved Nonna Rosa had been in the community. Restaurant industry colleagues, longtime customers, and extended family filled the church. I sat between my parents in the front row, fighting back tears as people spoke about Nonna's business success and community contributions. Not one person mentioned her incredible knowledge of traditional Italian cooking, her gift for storytelling, or her ability to make anyone feel welcome at her table, all things that had made her so special to me. After the burial, the family attorney, Jonathan Miller, approached us. He was a distinguished man in his 60s who had worked with my grandmother for over 20 years. The will reading will take place tomorrow at 2 o'clock at Rosa's home, he informed us. She left very specific instructions about how it should be conducted. That night, back at my parents' house, Victoria cornered me in the hallway outside my room. Her perfect features were arranged in an expression of fake sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. "Just so you know," she said, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge, "I wouldn't get your hopes up about tomorrow." Nonna was very clear about wanting the business legacy preserved. She and I had many discussions about the future of Smith Family Restaurants and my role in maintaining her vision. I was too emotionally drained to rise to her bait. "I don't care about the money, Victoria. I just miss her." She patted my arm condescendingly. "Of course you do. Just remember that some of us have been working for years to deserve our inheritance, not just playing around with food blogs and dropping out of culinary school." Her words stung, especially because they were so unfair. I had spent far more time with Nonna in her final years than Victoria had, listening to her stories and learning from her wisdom. But I was too tired to argue. I simply went into the guest room and closed the door, spending another restless night thinking about Nonna and wondering what the next day would bring. The next morning, we all gathered in Nonna Rosa's living room for the will reading. It was a cozy space that perfectly reflected her personality, comfortable furniture arranged to encourage conversation, family photos covering every surface, and the lingering scent of her favorite lavender candles. The afternoon light streamed through lace curtains, casting gentle shadows across the room where we had shared so many meals and conversations. Jonathan Miller sat at Nonna's antique dining table, arranging papers with methodical precision. My parents took the sofa with Victoria and Marcus beside them in matching armchairs. I sat in Nonna's favorite rocking chair, feeling somewhat out of place in my simple black dress among their designer morning attire. The only other person present was Giuseppe Romano, Nonna's neighbor and longtime friend, who sat quietly in the corner. "Thank you all for being here," Miller began formally. Rosa was very specific about how she wanted this proceeding to be conducted. "I will read the will exactly as she prepared it, with no deviations." He put on his reading glasses and began with the standard legal preamble. Then came the smaller bequests, donations to various Italian-American charities, gifts to longtime employees at the original restaurant, and a substantial sum to Giuseppe for 60 years of friendship and keeping me connected to the old country. Then came what I expected would be the main event. "To my granddaughter, Victoria Smith Thompson," Miller read, "I leave the sum of $2 million, to be used as she sees fit to continue expanding the Smith family restaurant legacy that she has proven herself capable of managing with business acumen that would make her grandfather proud." Victoria's face lit up with triumph while my parents nodded in satisfaction. My father reached over to squeeze Victoria's hand, pride evident in his expression. My mother actually clasped her hands together in delight. "Well deserved, darling," she said to Victoria. "To my granddaughter, Gabrielle Smith," Miller continued, and I felt my heart rate increase. This was it. Maybe a small sum to help with my writing career, or perhaps some of her cooking equipment that she knew I admired. "I leave my personal collection, to be managed according to the detailed instructions I have prepared separately." Miller finished, and the room went completely silent. A personal collection. That was it. I felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. My father cleared his throat and stood up. "Well, that seems straightforward," he said, his voice formal and satisfied. "Jonathan, I assume Gabrielle's personal collection refers to Rosa's cooking equipment and recipe cards. We can have that packed up and sent to her apartment." But Miller held up his hand. "Actually, there is more to the will that pertains specifically to Gabrielle," he said firmly. Rosa left explicit instructions that this portion was to be explained privately to Gabrielle alone, at least initially. My father's face darkened. That's highly irregular. As the family, we should all hear whatever concerns Gabrielle. With all due respect, Mr. Smith, Miller interrupted, I am following your mother's explicit legal instructions. She was very clear that this portion of the will was for Gabrielle's understanding first. He turned to me. Miss Smith, if you would stay after the others leave, we can proceed with the private portion of the reading. My mother's perfectly manicured nails dug into the sofa fabric. This is a family matter. We should all hear whatever concerns Gabrielle. Miller remained unmoved. These were Rosa's instructions, and they are legally binding. I must ask everyone except Gabrielle to leave the room at this time. After several minutes of protests and arguing, my family finally filed out of the living room, with my father threatening to call his own lawyers and my mother shooting worried looks in my direction. When the door closed behind them, leaving me alone with Jonathan Miller, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I apologize for the drama, Miss Smith, Miller said, his formal demeanor softening slightly. Your grandmother anticipated this reaction, which is why she structured her will this way. I don't understand, I said, still reeling from what had happened. What kind of personal collection could be worth all this secrecy? Miller smiled for the first time that day. A very valuable one, actually. What I'm about to share with you was arranged by your grandmother over the past 15 years. She was extremely careful to ensure that this information remained private until the right moment. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written on it in Nonna's distinctive handwriting. He handed it to me. Perhaps you should read this first, in your grandmother's own words. With trembling hands, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of cream-colored stationery. My dearest Gabrielle, the letter began, if you are reading this, then I have joined your nonno in whatever adventure comes next. Do not grieve too much for me, Cara MIA. I have had a beautiful life, though my greatest joy has been watching you grow into the remarkable woman you have become. Over the years, I have watched how your parents and sister have treated you. I have seen them dismiss your passion for authentic cooking, measuring your worth only in profit margins and business achievements. I recognized early on that you are different from them, just as I was different from your grandfather when we first married. He was all business, but I taught him that food is about more than making money, it's about preserving culture, creating memories, and nourishing souls. I have also seen your determination to honor traditional cooking methods despite their lack of support. Your blog posts, your articles, your commitment to authentic techniques, these things have made me prouder than any quarterly report ever could. What your family does not know, what I have kept secret for 15 years, is that I am the author behind the pseudonym Nonna Vera. You may know this name from the cookbook series that has sold over 3 million copies worldwide. I have been writing and publishing these cookbooks since 1995, documenting the authentic Italian recipes and techniques that I learned from my mother and grandmother. The 12 cookbooks in the Nonna Vera's Authentic Italian Kitchen series have generated approximately $8 million in royalties over the past 28 years. All of this money, plus the continuing royalty payments, I leave entirely to you. Additionally, I have been secretly following your food blog and articles under various online identities for the past 5 years. You write about food the way I have always felt about it, with reverence, with understanding of its cultural significance, with respect for the traditions that gave it meaning. Through intermediaries, I have been one of your regular freelance clients, commissioning articles for food magazines under my publishing company. There is more, Cara MIA. The house you are sitting in contains something special in the basement, a professional-grade test kitchen that I had installed 10 years ago. This is where I developed and tested all the recipes for my cookbooks. It also contains my archive, thousands of family recipes, historical cooking documentation, and the original handwritten recipes that built Smith family restaurants, recipes that the business has sadly abandoned in favor of cheaper, more profitable versions. One last thing, Gabrielle. For the past 3 years, I have been documenting how the restaurants have strayed from the authentic preparations that made them successful. I have kept detailed records of ingredient substitutions, preparation shortcuts, and cost-cutting measures that have compromised the food quality. This documentation is now yours, along with the legal rights to the original recipes that I created and that your father has been using without truly understanding their value. Your family will likely be angry. They may try to contest the will or pressure you to share your inheritance. Stand firm, Kara MIA. This is your legacy, not theirs. You are the keeper of our family's culinary traditions, the one who understands that true wealth comes from preserving culture and cooking with love. Use this gift to show the world what authentic Italian cooking really means. Make your nonna proud. Con tutto Illinois mio amore, Nonna Rosa. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face. I looked up at Jonathan Miller, who was waiting patiently. Is this real? I whispered. He nodded, smiling broadly. Very real. Your grandmother was extremely strategic about all of this. The Nonna Vera publishing business was operated through a separate LLC that your parents knew nothing about. The cookbook royalties were deposited into accounts they never had access to. Everything was arranged to be completely legal and virtually challenge-proof. Miller opened a leather portfolio and began showing me documents, publishing contracts, royalty statements, and photographs of the basement test kitchen. He explained the financial arrangements in detail. The cookbook royalties would continue to provide me with approximately $15,000 per month for the foreseeable future, plus I would inherit the accumulated $8 million from past sales. The house alone is worth $1.2 million, Miller continued. But the real treasure is in the basement. Your grandmother spent over $200,000 creating a professional test kitchen down there, plus her recipe archive contains documentation of traditional Italian cooking techniques that food historians would consider priceless. I felt overwhelmed. Just an hour ago, I had been the family disappointment, dismissed and undervalued. Now I was learning that my grandmother had not only been secretly supporting my career but had also built a culinary empire that dwarfed anything my parents had achieved. There's one more thing, Miller said, reaching into his briefcase again. He pulled out a leather-bound journal. Your grandmother kept detailed records during the creation of each cookbook. This documents not only her recipes and techniques but also her thoughts about preserving Italian culinary traditions in America. She asked me to give it to you as well. As I took the journal, Miller's expression grew more serious. You should prepare yourself, Miss Smith. When your family learns about this, the reaction may be intense. Your grandmother anticipated that they might contest the will, but given the separate business structure and the documentation we have, any challenge would be extremely difficult to win. I thought about my parents' faces when they learned the truth, about Victoria's smug confidence being shattered. Part of me wanted to march out there immediately and reveal everything. But another part, the part that had absorbed my grandmother's wisdom over the years, knew that this moment called for dignity and careful consideration. How should we proceed? I asked, straightening my shoulders. Your grandmother left that decision to you, Miller said. We can inform your family now, or you can take some time to process everything first. I should mention that there are some practical matters we need to discuss. The cookbook contracts need to be transferred to your name, and there are ongoing royalty payments that need your attention. I took a deep breath. They're waiting outside, probably getting more worried by the minute. Let's get this over with. Miller nodded, respecting my decision. Very well. Would you like me to explain, or would you prefer to tell them yourself? I think it would be better coming from you, I said. Officially, I mean. He nodded and moved toward the door. Before opening it, he turned back to me. Your grandmother spoke about you constantly, Miss Smith. She often told me that you were the true inheritor of her passion for authentic cooking, the one who understood that food is about more than business. She had tremendous faith in you. With those words, he opened the door to face my family. My family practically burst into the living room the moment Miller opened the door. My father led the charge, his face flushed with impatience. This has gone on long enough, he snapped. Whatever private arrangements my mother made, I have a right to know as her son and as someone who built a business on her foundation. My mother was right behind him, with Victoria and Marcus following closely. Even Giuseppe had returned from the kitchen where he'd been waiting, hovering uncertainly in the doorway with a concerned expression. Miller resumed his position at the dining table, once again the picture of professional composure. I remained in Nonna's rocking chair, clutching her letter and journal, trying to project a calm I didn't entirely feel. Now that everyone has returned, Miller began formally, I can complete the explanation of Rosa's bequest to Miss Gabrielle Smith. It's just family recipes and old cooking equipment, my mother interrupted dismissively. Robert already explained the situation. Rosa wanted to make sure Gabrielle had some sentimental items, but nothing of real value. Miller cleared his throat. Actually, Mrs. Smith, the bequest is significantly more substantial than was initially understood. He proceeded to outline the entirety of my inheritance, the Nonna Vera cookbook empire, the basement test kitchen, the original restaurant recipes, and the $8 million in accumulated royalties. As he spoke, I watched my family's expressions change from dismissive to shocked to outraged. This is impossible, my father exploded when Miller finished. My mother would never have done this without telling me. She built her reputation on the restaurants we created together. This must be some kind of fraud. On the contrary, Miller replied calmly. These arrangements began in 1995 and were updated regularly, with the most recent changes made just 6 months ago. I have extensive documentation of your mother's instructions, including video recordings of our meetings where she expressed her wishes clearly and competently. My mother had gone completely pale, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her shocked expression. Then, as the reality sank in, her shock transformed into fury. This is absolutely unacceptable, she said, her voice rising. How dare you, Gabrielle? How dare you manipulate a confused old woman into stealing what rightfully belongs to this family, to the people who actually built something with her recipes? I didn't know anything about this until just now, I said, finding my voice at last. Nonna never told me about the cookbooks or the money. Liar. Victoria spat, her composed facade cracking completely. You always played the victim, always acted like you were so misunderstood and artistic. You've been manipulating Nonna for years, filling her head with stories about preserving traditions while we were actually running the business. That's not true, I replied, feeling my own anger rising. I loved spending time with Nonna because she was the only one who understood my passion for authentic cooking. She supported my work because she believed in what I was doing. Giuseppe spoke up unexpectedly from the doorway, his accented English carrying the weight of authority. Rosa spoke to me many times about her plans for Gabrielle. She was completely clear in her mind about what she wanted to do. She told me that Gabrielle was the only one who understood that food is about culture and love, not just profit. My father whirled on Giuseppe. You knew about this and said nothing? What kind of friend keeps secrets like this? A loyal friend, Giuseppe replied steadily. Rosa asked for my discretion, and I respected her wishes. Just as you should respect them now, Roberto. This will not stand, my father declared, his business instincts kicking in. I will contest the will. There's no way my mother intended for millions of dollars to go to someone who dropped out of cooking school and writes blog posts for grocery money. Actually, Marcus interjected, his lawyer's mind clearly analyzing the situation. If Mr. Miller has extensive documentation and the arrangements were made over decades, contesting could be very difficult and extremely expensive. The business structure sounds like it was specifically designed to prevent challenges. My mother shot him a venomous look. Whose side are you on, Marcus? The argument escalated quickly, with accusations flying in all directions. My mother called me manipulative and ungrateful. My father threatened lawsuits against both me and Miller. Victoria alternated between crying about the unfairness and hurling insults at me, claiming I had never contributed anything meaningful to the family legacy. Through it all, I sat quietly, thinking about my grandmother's words, stand firm, Cara MIA. This is your legacy, not theirs. For perhaps the first time in my life, I felt a strength within me that couldn't be diminished by their disapproval or anger. Finally, when there was a brief lull in the shouting, I stood up, still clutching Nonna's letter. I didn't ask for this inheritance, I said clearly, my voice cutting through the tension. But Nonna Rosa believed in me and my work when none of you did. She saw value in preserving authentic cooking traditions, in maintaining the cultural significance of food that goes beyond profit margins. Easy to say when you've just been handed millions, Victoria snapped. You've never had to work for anything real in your life. I've been working, I replied, my voice growing stronger. I've been writing, teaching, cooking, trying to honor the traditions that Nonna taught me. The difference is that I wasn't doing it for money, I was doing it because I believed it mattered. Nonna understood that. My mother stood up, her face contorted with rage. You have a choice to make right now, Gabrielle. If you accept this ridiculous inheritance, if you don't share it appropriately with your family who actually built the restaurant business, then you are no longer welcome in this family. No daughter of mine would be so selfish. I looked at her, really looked at the woman who had given birth to me but had never truly supported my dreams. I'm not being selfish, Mom. I'm honoring Nonna's wishes. And if you can't accept that your mother saw value in what I do, in who I am, then maybe I am better off without this family. You ungrateful little, my mother began, but my father put a restraining hand on her arm. This isn't over, he said coldly. We will be contacting our attorneys immediately. Don't think for one moment that you'll get away with this. With that, he guided my mother toward the door. Victoria gave me one last contemptuous look before following them. Marcus hesitated, then nodded slightly to me, perhaps with a hint of respect, before joining his wife. Only Giuseppe remained, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and pride. Your Nonna would be very proud of you, Gabrielle, he said softly. She knew this would happen, and she knew you would have the strength to handle it. She often told me, Gabrielle has the heart of a true Italian cook. She understands that food is love made visible. As the sound of my family's angry voices faded down the street, I sat back down in Nonna's rocking chair, suddenly exhausted but also feeling strangely liberated. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my family without backing down, without apologizing for who I was or what I believed in. Miller gathered his papers, looking slightly ruffled but professional as ever. That went about as well as your grandmother predicted, he said. She warned me that they would react badly to learning about the cookbook income, especially since it appears to have generated more money than the restaurants did in pure profit. Would you like me to arrange for you to see the test kitchen tomorrow? He asked. There's quite a lot we need to discuss in the coming days about transferring the publishing contracts and managing the ongoing royalties. I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Yes, I'd like that very much. And Mr. Miller, thank you for handling all of this. I know it couldn't have been easy. He allowed himself a small smile. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Miss Smith. It's been an honor to carry out her final wishes. She often told me that you were the true keeper of her culinary legacy. He handed me his business card along with a set of keys. These are for the house and the test kitchen. Call me anytime. We have a lot to discuss in the coming days. As I left my grandmother's house that day, I knew that my life had irrevocably changed. Not just because of the inheritance, but because I had finally found my voice and my strength. The scared, uncertain woman who had walked into that living room was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth. 3 months after the will reading, I stood in the middle of the basement test kitchen that now belonged to me, hardly able to believe the transformation in my life. The space was even more incredible than Miller had described, a professional-grade kitchen that rivaled anything I had seen in culinary school, with commercial-grade equipment, temperature-controlled storage, and walls lined with Nonna's handwritten recipe cards organized in meticulous detail. The test kitchen had become my sanctuary. Every morning, I would come down here with my coffee and spend hours going through Nonna's archives, discovering recipes and techniques that had been lost to the restaurant business's focus on efficiency and cost-cutting. The original recipe for the Smith family restaurant marinara sauce called for San Marzano tomatoes, fresh basil, and a 6-hour slow cooking process. The current version used generic canned tomatoes, dried herbs, and was prepared in bulk to reduce labor costs. Jonathan Miller had been invaluable during the transition period. He connected me with editors at major publishing houses, helped me navigate the complexities of the cookbook business, and most importantly, defended my inheritance against my family's legal challenges. As Miller had predicted, my father filed to contest the will almost immediately. However, the extensive documentation my grandmother had prepared, including the video recordings of her clearly stating her wishes and the separate business structure of her publishing empire, made their case extremely weak. After 2 months of legal maneuvering and significant attorney fees, their lawyer advised them to drop the challenge, which they reluctantly did. I had not spoken to my parents or Victoria since the day of the will reading. They had made their position clear, and I had made my choice. It hurt, of course, the complete severing of family relationships always does, but the pain was overshadowed by the excitement of discovering my grandmother's hidden world and building something meaningful with her legacy. One of the first people Miller introduced me to was Elena Rossini, a respected food writer and cookbook editor who had been secretly working with my grandmother under the Nonna Vera pseudonym for over a decade. Elena was a stylish woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and an infectious passion for authentic Italian cooking. She became both mentor and collaborator as I navigated the complexities of the food publishing world. "Your grandmother approached me 15 years ago," Elena explained during our first meeting over lunch in Little Italy. "She had these incredible family recipes and such a deep understanding of regional Italian cooking, but she was worried about her English writing skills. I helped her organize and present her knowledge, but the heart of every cookbook was pure Rosa." Elena helped me understand the business side of food writing and publishing. How to work with editors, how to develop cookbook concepts, how to build relationships with food photographers and stylists. Under her guidance, I began to develop a vision for continuing the Nonna Vera series while also establishing my own voice in the culinary world. "You have your grandmother's gift," Elena told me. "But you also bring something new, your understanding of food blogging, social media, and how modern home cooks want to learn. Rosa always worried that traditional techniques would die out. You can bridge that gap." During this period, I also spent countless hours with the recipe archive my grandmother had left me. It was housed in climate-controlled filing cabinets in the test kitchen, and exploring it was like taking a journey through Italian culinary history. The collection included not only family recipes dating back 5 generations but also documentation of regional variations, historical cooking techniques, and detailed notes about ingredient sourcing and seasonal preparation. And there, in a special section marked Gabrielle's work, were printouts of every blog post I had ever written, every article I had published, with my grandmother's handwritten notes in the margins. Comments like "Brava, you understand," and "exactly like my nonna taught me," filled the pages. Reading my grandmother's journal became a nightly ritual. Her entries chronicled not just her thoughts about the cookbook business she was building, but also memories of her own childhood in Italy, observations about my growth as a food writer, and her concerns about the direction of the family restaurants. One entry in particular stood out, dated just 6 months before her death. "Watched Gabrielle's Instagram video today about making pasta by hand. She explained the importance of using 00 flour and letting the dough rest, things I tried to teach Victoria years ago but she said were too time-consuming for restaurant service. Gabrielle understands that some things cannot be rushed, that cooking is meditation, that food made with patience tastes of love. She is ready for what I am planning to give her." The journal helped me understand conversations and moments with my grandmother that had seemed ordinary at the time but were actually part of her larger plan. Questions about my dreams for food writing, discussions about traditional techniques I wanted to preserve, even casual comments about cookbook publishing. All had been gathering information for the legacy she was creating. Despite the financial cushion provided by the cookbook royalties, launching my new career as the official inheritor of the Nonna Vera brand was not without challenges. There were publishing contracts to renegotiate, new cookbook proposals to develop, and the enormous responsibility of continuing a series that had sold millions of copies worldwide. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was worthy of carrying on my grandmother's work, if I had the knowledge and skill to maintain the quality that readers expected from the Nonna Vera brand. During one particularly stressful week when I was struggling with the outline for the 13th cookbook in the series, I received an unexpected visit. I was in the test kitchen, surrounded by recipe cards and cooking notes, when the doorbell rang. I climbed the stairs to find Victoria standing on the front porch, looking uncomfortable and out of place in her business suit. "Victoria," I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She glanced around at the modest neighborhood, so different from the wealthy enclaves where our family usually spent time. "I was driving by after a meeting with investors. Thought I'd see what you're doing with Nonna's house." There was less hostility in her voice than I had expected, though still an edge of skepticism. Would you like to come in? I offered, stepping back from the doorway. She hesitated, then nodded. I led her through the house, which I had been gradually redecorating to honor Nonna's memory while making it my own. Unlike our parents' sterile showplace, I had created a warm, lived-in atmosphere with family photos, Italian pottery, and the sense of whatever I had been cooking wafting from the kitchen. It's very homey, Victoria commented, running her hand along a bookshelf filled with cookbooks in both English and Italian. Is that a compliment or a criticism? I asked. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Maybe both. It's just so different from what I expected. She paused in front of a framed photo of Nonna in her original restaurant kitchen, wearing a flour-dusted apron and laughing at something off-camera. I found a box of these photos in her bedroom, I explained. Pictures from the early days that I'd never seen before. Victoria studied the photo with an expression I couldn't quite read. She looks so happy there. Different from how I remember her in later years. Would you like to see the test kitchen? I asked impulsively. It's where she developed all the Nonna Vera recipes. She looked surprised. There's more to the house. I led her downstairs to the basement, watching her reaction as she took in the professional-grade kitchen with its commercial equipment and walls of organized recipe cards. Her business-trained eye immediately assessed the value and functionality of the space. This is incredible, she said, genuinely impressed. When did she build this? About 10 years ago, according to Mr. Miller. She spent over $200,000 creating it. I gestured to the recipe archives. This is where she documented all the traditional techniques and family recipes, including the original versions of all the Smith restaurant dishes. Victoria's expression shifted, becoming more serious. The original versions? I pulled out a file folder and showed her the side-by-side comparison I had been working on, Nonna's original marinara sauce recipe versus the current restaurant version. She kept detailed records of how the recipes changed over the years, how ingredients were substituted to cut costs. Victoria studied the documents with her analytical mind, clearly understanding the implications. Some of these changes, she said slowly, I recommended them myself. I thought we were being smart about cost management. You were, I said, trying to keep judgment out of my voice. From a business perspective, it made perfect sense. But Nonna was worried about losing the authenticity that made the restaurant special in the first place. An uncomfortable silence fell between us. Finally, Victoria spoke again. The restaurants are struggling, she admitted quietly. We've lost 3 major investors in the past 6 months. Customer reviews have been declining, and several food bloggers have criticized our food for being generic and overpriced. I wasn't sure how to respond to that revelation. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt sad for the family business that had once meant so much to Nonna. I'm sorry to hear that, I said finally. Victoria looked around the test kitchen again, then back at me. Did you really not know about any of this? The cookbooks, the money, the recipes? No, I said firmly. I had no idea until Mr. Miller read the will. Nonna never told me she was Nonna Vera. She studied my face, seeming to search for deception, then nodded slightly. I believe you. And I have to admit, looking at all this. She gestured around the kitchen, it's pretty impressive. She really built something down here. She did. And she left me instructions to continue it, to keep publishing cookbooks that preserve traditional Italian cooking methods. Victoria was quiet for a moment, then asked, what are you working on now? I explained my plans for the next Nonna Vera cookbook, focused on regional Italian comfort foods, and my idea for a new series under my own name that would combine traditional techniques with modern home cooking needs. You seem to have really thought this through, she said, a note of surprise in her voice. I mean, you have an actual business plan. I may not have gone to Wharton, but I'm not completely clueless about business, I replied, unable to keep a slight defensive tone from my voice. Victoria had the grace to look embarrassed. I know. I'm sorry. It's just, you're so different from what I expected. More focused, more professional. She walked over to examine some of the recipe cards more closely. These are incredibly detailed. Look at these notes about seasonal ingredients, regional variations. It's like a masterclass in Italian cooking. Nonna spent decades collecting and documenting these techniques, I said. She was worried they would be lost if someone didn't preserve them. Victoria turned to face me directly. Look, Gabrielle, I'm not going to pretend I'm happy about how the inheritance worked out. But after the initial shock wore off, I've been thinking about what Nonna did and why she did it. And I'm starting to realize that maybe she saw something in you that the rest of us missed. It was as close to an apology or acknowledgement as I was likely to get from Victoria. I decided to accept it for what it was. Thank you for saying that, I said. And for what it's worth, I think you've done incredible work building the restaurant business. Nonna was proud of that too. She just had different dreams for preserving the culinary traditions. Victoria nodded, accepting the olive branch. I should go. Marcus is waiting. At the door, she paused. Good luck with the cookbook, Gabby. I mean that. After she left, I sat in Nonna's rocking chair, processing the unexpected encounter. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not by a long shot, but it was something. A crack in the wall of family estrangement, a recognition that maybe we could coexist even if we couldn't fully understand each other. The following months were a whirlwind of activity as I worked on establishing myself as the legitimate heir to the Nonna Vera brand. The 13th cookbook in the series, Nonna Vera's Regional Comfort Foods, was scheduled for publication in the spring, and I was simultaneously developing my own cookbook concept under my name. Elena introduced me to food photographers, helped me connect with cooking shows, and guided me through the process of building a professional platform. Despite my initial nervousness about stepping out from behind my grandmother's pseudonym, I discovered that I had inherited more than just her recipes. I had also absorbed her gift for teaching and sharing culinary knowledge. My food blog, now professionally supported and promoted, grew from a few hundred followers to over 50,000. I started teaching cooking classes in the test kitchen, focusing on traditional Italian techniques that were in danger of being lost. The classes filled up immediately, with waiting lists stretching for months. The success wasn't just about the money, though the financial security was transformative. For the first time in my adult life, I could focus entirely on cooking and writing without worrying about rent or medical bills. But more importantly, I had found my purpose, carrying on my grandmother's mission to preserve and share authentic Italian culinary traditions. 6 months after taking over the Nonna Vera brand, I received a call from Elena that would change everything. Gabrielle, she said, excitement evident in her voice, I just got off the phone with the Food Network. They want to offer you your own cooking show. I nearly dropped my phone. What? A cooking show, focused on traditional Italian techniques and family recipes. They've been following your blog and class reviews, and they're impressed by how you combine authenticity with accessibility. They want to meet with you next week. The show, eventually titled Nonna's Kitchen, Authentic Italian with Gabrielle Smith, premiered 8 months later. Unlike the flashy, competitive cooking shows that dominated the network, mine focused on the stories behind traditional dishes, the cultural significance of family recipes, and the meditative aspects of cooking by hand. Each episode featured me in Nonna's test kitchen, teaching viewers how to make authentic versions of classic dishes while sharing stories about their origins and cultural importance. The response was overwhelming. Viewers appreciated the slower pace, the emphasis on tradition, and the respect for the emotional connections that food creates. 1 year after my grandmother's death, I stood in the main dining room of Rosa's Table, the restaurant I had opened in a converted brownstone in Brooklyn's Carroll Gardens. Unlike the upscale Smith family restaurant locations with their focus on quick service and high profit margins, Rosa's Table was designed to recreate the feeling of eating in an Italian grandmother's home. The space seated only 40 people, with mismatched vintage tables, family photos on the walls, and an open kitchen where guests could watch me and my small team preparing everything from scratch using traditional techniques. We changed the menu seasonally based on available ingredients, and every dish was prepared using Nonna's original recipes, the authentic versions that had been abandoned by the family restaurants. The opening had been featured in several food magazines, and we had been booked solid for 3 months straight. Food critics praised the restaurant for its commitment to authenticity and its warm, welcoming atmosphere. But the review that meant the most to me came from a customer who wrote on social media, "This food tastes like my Nonna's cooking." I cried eating the osso buco because it brought back so many memories of Sunday dinners with my family. My relationship with my parents remained strained, but there had been some progress. 2 months earlier, I had received a letter from my father, formal and businesslike, but representing the first outreach from them since the will reading. Dear Gabrielle, it began, recent developments have prompted me to reflect on our family situation. While I continue to have reservations about the circumstances surrounding your inheritance, I cannot deny that you have managed your legacy with more skill than I anticipated. The success of your restaurant and cookbook has been noted in industry publications, and several colleagues have spoken positively about your professionalism and vision. Your mother and I would be amenable to discussing a reconciliation should you be interested. Regardless of past disagreements, you remain our daughter. Sincerely, Robert Smith. It was hardly warm, but it was something. After much consideration and several sessions with a therapist I could now afford, I had agreed to meet them for lunch at a neutral restaurant. That lunch had been tense and awkward, with my mother saying little and my father controlling the conversation as usual. But it was a start. I made it clear during that meeting that any future relationship would need to be built on mutual respect and acceptance. I'm proud of what I've built, I told them. I hope someday you can be proud of me too, not because I've made money, but because I've honored Nonna's legacy and preserved something meaningful. My relationship with Victoria had improved significantly. After her initial visit to the house, she had returned several times, genuinely curious about the traditional cooking techniques and the business model I was developing. She had even attended one of my cooking classes, awkwardly attempting to make fresh pasta while I guided her through the process. The real breakthrough came when she asked if I would consider consulting with the Smith family restaurants to help them return to more authentic preparations. Our customer satisfaction scores have been declining, she admitted. Maybe we lost something important when we focused so much on efficiency and cost-cutting. We had started working together on a limited basis, with me helping to develop more authentic versions of their signature dishes. It was slow progress, complicated by the entrenched systems and cost structures of the restaurant chain, but it was a way for us to collaborate rather than compete. The most meaningful moment of reconciliation came when Victoria brought our parents to eat at Rosa's table. I watched nervously from the kitchen as they tried the dishes I had prepared using Nonna's original recipes, the marinara sauce with San Marzano tomatoes, the osso buco braised for hours until the meat fell off the bone, the handmade gnocchi that took most of the afternoon to prepare properly. My father, who had built his career on the business side of restaurants, ate in complete silence. When he finished, he asked to speak with me privately. "This food," he said quietly, "it tastes like what your grandmother used to make in the early days, before we started expanding." I had forgotten. He paused, looking uncomfortable with the emotion in his voice. I had forgotten how good it was. It wasn't a complete apology or a full acknowledgement of what they had put me through, but it was recognition. Recognition that what I was doing had value, that my approach to cooking and business was legitimate, that my grandmother's faith in me had been justified. As I walked through Rosa's table that anniversary evening, checking on tables and chatting with regular customers who had become like family, I reflected on the incredible journey of the past year. My grandmother's inheritance had changed my life in ways that went far beyond the financial security it provided. The money and resources had given me opportunities, yes, but the true gift had been the confidence to trust my instincts and pursue my authentic vision of success. I had learned that wealth could be measured in many ways, in creative fulfillment, in preserving cultural traditions, in creating meaningful experiences for others. I had learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean cutting others out of your life, but rather establishing boundaries that allow for genuine relationships built on mutual respect. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't defined by my family's approval or by conventional business metrics. It came from staying true to my values, from honoring the traditions that mattered to me, and from using my talents to contribute something meaningful to the world. I paused in front of a framed photo near the restaurant's entrance, my grandmother Rosa in her original restaurant kitchen, the same photo that Victoria had noticed in the house. But now it was accompanied by a small plaque that read, "In memory of Rosa Benedetto Smith, 1928 to 2017, who taught us that food is love made visible. Her legacy lives on in every dish we serve. Grazie, Nonna, I whispered to the photograph. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, for showing me that the most important inheritance isn't money, it's the courage to follow your heart. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more growth, more lessons to learn. But for the first time in my life, I was facing the future with confidence rather than anxiety, with excitement rather than dread. I had found my own path, and it was seasoned with love, tradition, and the unshakable knowledge that some recipes are worth preserving no matter what the cost. So, what about you? Have you ever had someone in your life who saw your potential when others dismissed you? Have you ever discovered that what made you different from your family was actually your greatest strength? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and share with someone who might need to be reminded that success comes in many forms, not all of them measured in dollars. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, the most valuable inheritance anyone can give you is the belief that you are worthy of pursuing your dreams. But ultimately, that belief has to come from within. Cook with love, preserve what matters, and never let anyone convince you that your passion isn't worth pursuing. Ciao for now.